16. So to get us there, we're going to hear from Mark all throughout Lent. This morning begins that journey with Mark 2. Jesus went out again beside the lake. The whole crowd gathered around him, and he taught them. And as he was walking along, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax booth. And he said to him, "Follow me." And he got up and followed him. And as he sat at dinner in Levi's house, many tax collectors and sinners were also sitting with Jesus and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. When the scribes and the Pharisees saw that he was eating with sinners and tax collectors, they said to his disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" When Jesus heard this, he said to them, "Those who are well have no need of physician, but those who are sick. I have come to call not the righteous, but sinners." Would you pray with me for just one moment? Lord, speak to these people whom you love through your most imperfect vessel. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. 4 verses. All we've got here, 4 verses. As I thought about this set of 4 verses this week, I just kept having this thought going through my head. What if this entire text was told through memes? Now, if you don't know what a meme is, I guarantee you have seen one. You just didn't know that's what it was called. A meme is a picture or a short video clip that's somewhat usually humorous, but it can be very serious in nature. So as I was thinking about this text, I just could not get it out of my head. What if this entire narrative was being told as what would Jesus mean? Right? The glamour shots picture of Jesus. This is a meme. I actually created it this week with www.memegenerator.com. You can actually do this. I didn't know that. I thought they all appeared out of an office somewhere in Silicon Valley in California. But no, you can actually make them. So I made this one. So what would Jesus mean? Well, we have to ask who would Jesus be memeing? Who would he be sending these text memes to? Well, there's 4 different audiences in this text. You have the scribes, you have the sinners and tax collectors, you have the disciples, and then you have us. We are an audience of this text. We read it. We are included in the story. So let's start, first of all, with the scribes. Sometimes called scholars of the law, sometimes just called Pharisees. They're all one and the same group. These scribes are deeply religious men. They truly, truly believe in God. They study hours upon hours of the law of God. But sometimes their study has made them feel as though, well, not sometimes, often, has made them feel that they are far superior to anyone else. They have more knowledge than anybody else about the law and about God. And so because of that, they kind of have a self-righteous streak. They really believe in, they are truly convinced that they and only their way of doing things is the right way, the correct way to do them. They're missing the point of what God is saying in the law. So they are missing the forest for the trees, as the expression goes. And they happen upon this scene. Now, some of their indignation is actually very well placed. The tax collectors, who is the next group we'll talk about, the tax collectors are locals, they're Jews, who work for the Romans. And the scribes really don't like that somebody has invaded their holy land. They know that this land and these people are God's special people. This is God's special land. So they're really kind of indignant about tax collectors. The tax collectors are really ruining it for people. And so we would think that if they want to get the tax collectors more in line with God, teaching them more about what God actually desires for them over and above working for Roman occupiers, you would think that the scribes would want to get into closer proximity with them to teach them the more correct way. But in fact, what happens is the exact opposite reaction. The scribes want nothing to do with the tax collectors and the sinners. They want to keep as much distance away from them as possible, and then they constantly complain that the sinners and the tax collectors' lives never change. Well, how would they know to change? How would they know what to change to if there's nobody there to teach them? So these scribes and Pharisees, they are very self-righteous. They are utterly convinced that the way they do things, in fact, the way they dress, the way they speak, the way they walk, everything about their lives makes them holy. And it creates a huge chasm of distance between them and everybody else in the society. These Pharisees and scribes were so concerned with cleanliness that they were afraid to get too close because they might become ritually unclean. You remember the story of the Good Samaritan. We hear a priest walks by and a Levite walks by, and they don't want to touch the man laying on the road because he might be dead. That's the kind of world that these Pharisees and scribes live in their minds. We can't get too close. We might get dirty. Might actually have to get in there with people. I don't think so. And so they live at a distance. So as I thought about it this week, what text would Jesus send to them? This is what I came up with. You were a believer, yes, but you skipped the not being a jerk about it part. Jesus is never saying to the Pharisees, and sometimes in our modern reading we think that Jesus is saying this, but I don't think that he is. He's never telling the Pharisees and the scribes, you're wrong. What you believe and what you teach is wrong. He's not saying that. He's saying you're just doing it wrong. You're not carrying it out correctly. What you believe is correct, but you're being kind of jerks about it. So he's trying to show them a different way of doing things. And so we see it in this scene especially, where Jesus is at dinner with the Pharisees, or with the tax collectors and the sinners. So that's our next group of people. Jesus is simultaneously speaking to them. He's having audience with them. And it's really kind of an interesting scene, because those scribes, their question is actually, makes good sense. Why would any self-respecting, good Jewish rabbi, why would you go to dinner with sinners and tax collectors? Don't do that. And their point's actually well taken. You wouldn't do that unless you're up to something else, unless you're trying to do something, which Jesus is. Now these tax collectors I mentioned before, they're publicans, they're contractors for the Romans. Their job was to pay a sum. They were usually very, very wealthy people. And so they would pay a sum of taxes to the Romans and then get it reimbursed to them. So if, for example, in their tax district, it cost $100, they, the tax collector, would pay the $100 to the Romans. And then they would go out and recoup the $100. Except it didn't work out as we pay 100 and we collect 100. It was more like we pay 100 and we collect 500, 600, 1,000. And if you didn't pay what was owed to the tax collector, because they worked for the Romans, they could call in the army and have you thrown into jail, or those nice centurions could help you find your wallet in any way. You were going to pay what was owed, or you were going to jail. Now what ended up happening very often was that people could not afford these exorbitant, extorted payments from the tax collectors, and so they would have to take out a humongous loan against their property to pay back the tax collector. Guess who offered most of those loans? The tax collectors. Yeah, they'd loan you the money. And it was very interesting. The interest rates were incredibly high. And then the people couldn't pay it back. So guess what the tax collector got? He got your property. Yeah. So now you're homeless and poor. And you still owe him money. Because the loan doesn't get thrown away just because the land is recouped. So these tax collectors were ruthless people. And if we think for a second that what would tax collectors talk about at dinner? Right? Because I'm kind of wondering that. I always like to look at the earthiness of these scenes. Jesus is there, and they don't sit at dinner in a Roman context. You actually lay down, which would be really weird, but that's the way it worked. You reclined usually on the left elbow, and you ate with the right. So there's all these people around the table kind of laying there eating, and it's the Roman style. And Jesus can hear their conversations. I like to imagine what those conversations are. Well, let me tell you a story there, Bob. Last week, I got the Smith family to pay me twice as much as they owed. Right? This is what they're talking about. How they are screwing people out of their own money. And Jesus is just sitting there listening to it. He's listening to these conversations. There's probably tips and advice about how to get even more out of the people. How to get them to pay up more. How to get more land in all one fell swoop. Jesus is listening to this. And I think in rabbinic fashion, Jesus would ask them questions. I don't think that he would be in such a situation if he didn't want to try to transform them. Try to get them to think differently. I could almost hear Jesus asking them, do you know that people are homeless because of what you're doing? Do you realize that there are children now who are starving because you've taken away all of their parents' income? Good rabbis only ask questions, they never give answers. He's starting to transform them from the inside out. He is willing to cross a social boundary, a holy line where a good man of good repute would never go. Somebody like Jesus should not have been there. In fact, I wonder if the tax collectors were kind of wondering, what's this guy? He's a good guy. What's he doing here on the other side of the tracks? What's he doing here? But he's there to change them. He's there to show them a different way, to show them that there is nowhere that God won't go, and that God doesn't go, and that God isn't trying to redeem it. We see that Jesus doesn't seek out the scribes, he seeks out the tax collectors. He is trying to essentially redeem the world from the bottom up. Jesus isn't coming for the perfected in faith. He's coming for those who don't even have it close to being together. So I think if Jesus were to send a text to that group, to the scribes, or to the Pharisees, to the tax collectors and the sinners, I'm trying to remember these groups in a special order in my head, and I'm getting a little mixed up. But if he were to do that, this is the one I think he would send. Jesus comes not for the super spiritual, but for the wobbly and the weak-kneed, who know they don't have it all together, and who are not too proud to accept the handout of amazing grace. That's who Jesus has come for. And that's what that whole point at the end is. When they say, well, why is he eating with sinners and tax collectors? And Jesus says, why would I come for somebody who's not sick? You don't go to the doctor when you're well. Actually, we do. Different time. This was before HMOs. But you follow the logic. You don't go to the doctor when you're sick. You only go to the doctor when you're not. But in this case, they're not going to the doctor. The physician is coming to them. He knows what the illness is. And it's interesting, he does not direct that comment to the scribes. He directs it to the scribes. And he directs it to the sinners and the tax collectors. And he directs it to the disciples who are listening, and he directs it to us. He doesn't just say to one group. He's making sure that we are all listening to what he is saying. That he's come for not the righteous, but for sinners. Wow. Why not come for the righteous? They've got it all together. Well, they think they do. The sinners know they don't. The righteous think, yeah, maybe I do. So the next group that Jesus would send a text to would be his own disciples. He's teaching them in this moment because I bet they are also puzzled. The tax collectors are wondering what Jesus is doing there. The Pharisees have made it clear, why is such a good man being here? And the disciples are going like, yeah, why are we here? But Jesus is trying to teach them a point. So if he sent them a meme, I think it would be this one. Be like me. Spend enough time with sinners to ruin your reputation with religious people. That would be his advice to his disciples. Hang out on the wrong side of the tracks. Hang out with people that everybody around you goes, why are you hanging out with them? Make people question what you're up to. When you're hanging out with a person that doesn't look like they would fit in church, though I don't even know what that means. I hear that all the time. Well, they don't look like they would belong in a church. What does that even mean? If anybody's ever seen Nadia Bolz-Weber, Reverend Nadia Bolz-Weber, my spirit animal, she wears cut-off shirts. She's got sleeve tattoos, she's pierced, and she is a Lutheran pastor. She also talks like a trucker, but that's a whole other thing about her. But she says, she even describes herself, and she says, I'm the person that everybody says doesn't belong in a church. But if you listen to her preach or you read her books, you realize this woman is more thoroughly steeped in Lutheranism than Luther himself was. She's so orthodox and so loving, but she doesn't look like somebody who would blend in. But when you look at her church, everybody looks like her. It makes sense. She speaks that language. Jesus is telling his disciples, don't allow yourselves to be wooed by those who are self-assured and who are self-righteous. Get down in the trenches. Get dirty. Go to the places where nobody thinks the church ever should go. And there is no place the church should never not go. I had to think about the logic of that. The church is always called to be always, everywhere, every place. Because the creation belongs to God. God's people are called to be there. We as humans have made some places to say, oh, don't go there. Why? God's children live there. And we describe neighborhoods in our own area. When we first moved here, we asked people, well, where's a good restaurant for this? Where can we go shopping for this? They'd tell us. And they'd also say, do not go to the Lower East Side. Why? Oh, well, why? Why not? Well, no good reason is ever given. Human characteristics. What's violent? So are our schools. We still go there. So are our churches. And we still go there. I could walk out the door right now and get smacked by a car. It's not going to stop me from doing it. We attach these labels and these stereotypes to places and we say, oh, don't go there. Why? If it's violent, doesn't it need peace? If there are hurting people, don't they need wholeness? Don't they need a physician? If there's brokenness, if there's addiction, if there's fractured families, don't those places need Jesus the most? Why do we avoid it? Because of what the world tells us to believe. This quote maybe isn't ripped directly from Jesus, but he's telling us this. Go to where there is hurting. Go to where I am needed most. Go to that place and proclaim my name. Show them what love looks like. Go there. Do those things. There is no place that the church doesn't belong. The church belongs everywhere. There's no group of people that are so far outside that they can't receive God's love. That's ridiculous. Everyone is open to receive God's love. Everyone can. They're all beloved children of God. Every place can be redeemed. Desmond Tutu Bishop Desmond Tutu has a comment. He says, poverty, like famine, are human inventions. Think about that. Poverty is a human invention. We create it. We can destroy it. Whether or not we choose to. The last group of people that Jesus is speaking to in this, that he's sending those memes to, is us. We are the 2,000-year, we're the long-distance audience. We're the people that are still being spoken to. So if Jesus were to confront us, I think some of what I've already said is there, but there's a few other thoughts. This is what God's kingdom is like. A bunch of outcasts and oddballs gathered at a table, not because they are rich or worthy or good, but because they are hungry, because they said yes, and there's always room for more. That's what God's kingdom looks like. It's not the perfected. It's those who are being perfected. It's not the righteous, it's those who are being made righteous by the act of God. It is not those who are merciful, it's those who have received mercy. It's a bunch of oddballs and screw-ups, people that don't look like they would ever fit into this place. If you were trying to create a kingdom, you would think you'd want the rich and the wealthy and the powerful and the influential. God says, no, I don't want those people. I want the oddballs and the screw-ups. I want the backwards people. I want the people that don't make any sense in any context of anything that involves power or prestige or influence. Those are my people. That's my kingdom. I will be their king. We are called to reflect the kingdom of God in our own weirdness, in our own oddities, in who we have been made by God to be. I think Jesus would also tell us to preach the gospel, but don't just preach it, live it first. The message that we proclaim with our mouths must be tested by the actions of our hands and our feet. We can say a lot of really good stuff. We can quote scripture ad nauseum. Guess who else can? That's right. We can recite every creed of the church, and you know what we have proven? We're really good at memorization. We can say, I believe in Jesus, and that's great. Do we live that? Do we actually carry that out in our hands and our feet? Do we carry it beyond this time on Sundays? Is this our time during the week to be Christians? Or are we Christians everywhere, always, with all people, in all contexts, in all situations? It's just a question I leave for you. The last. Our job is to love others without stopping to inquire whether or not they are worthy. Think about the call narrative of the first 4 disciples. Jesus just walks up and says, follow me. Think about this call narrative of Levi the tax collector. Jesus doesn't stop and ask Levi whether or not Levi is worthy. In fact, by knowing that Levi is a tax collector, Jesus knows he's really not worthy. He knows he's a criminal. He knows that he is backwards and he's ruining people's lives. He knows that. He just walks right up and says, follow me. Levi is just raised out of his seat and boom, on the way he goes. We never hear again from Levi. That's kind of an interesting fact. In Mark's gospel, we never hear the name again. We never hear it listed in the name of disciples. Jesus doesn't stop and ask him whether or not he's worthy of God's love. Why do we? Why do we look at it just, well, yeah, I guess I can love that. Okay. We do that. Whether we want to admit it or not, we do that. We do look at people and we say, I don't know that I can ever see you in church, so I'm not really going to approach you. You seem like a safe person. I can take you to church. We do this. It is in our heads. It's in our hearts that we do this. We do stop and inquire whether or not somebody is worthy to receive God's love. We do this. During Lent, we are called to be honest and authentic. So if I'm saying things that hurt your ears and you say, no, I never do that, stop, reflect. I'll be the first one to admit I do this. I do. If that's what it requires for us all to admit, I will admit it. I've done this. I still do this. We're broken. We're seeking to be redeemed. We are seeking to be restored. We try to change this. We try not to say, well, whether or not you're worthy of God. No, we do. And we seek not to. We seek to be more bold in our faith, in our expressions, in our teaching, in what we do all the time, to be authentic. To be authentic, the first thing we have to do is admit we're a bunch of fakes. Then we can be authentic. That we use the title, we wear the jewelry, we got the funny little thing around our neck here, and then it all falls apart. We leave out of the parking lot, somebody cuts us off in traffic. Ooh, it's all over there. It is all over there. There's a lot of Jesus Christ being yelled. But I'll tell you what, not really holy. We have to admit our own brokenness. We have to admit our own need for God, that we were not worthy. Richard Rohr is a Catholic theologian, a Franciscan. In his really, really good book that I have, he has several, but I have the one that I think is his best. He says, we look at God and say, Lord, I'm not worthy of your love. And God looks back at us and says, well, of course you're not. But that's not the question I'm asking. That's what we're called to do. It's to remember that we aren't worthy. We never were, we never will be. But that's not what love is all about. We are called to this ministry, this gospel life, this mission as the church, to not stop and ask. To realize that the sinful, broken, backward, sideways, always screwed up people are the exact same people that Jesus came for. It's the people like us. We don't sit here on Sunday because we've got it all together. If that were true, you'd never come here again. You'd figure it out on one Sunday, and you'd be good. We keep coming again and again and again because we don't have it all figured out. We have to admit that. We want to bring more and more people to Christ because we're saying, look, I'm a huge screw-up, and I want you to meet the person who loves me even though I'm really screwed up. That's what we're called to. Not to stop and ask, I don't know if you're worthy of God's love. We're not the arbiters of it. We're not the ones who give it out. God does. Chooses to work through us. As we go throughout Lent, we'll hear more and more of what Christ is up to and what he calls us to be part of. Suffice it to say, he is overturning the world. He started it in his ministry, but he still continues to overturn it time and time and time again. It's a revolutionary world, this new kingdom of God. And we are called to be rebels.